Hello. Are you fed up with the nonsense that we hear non-stop from the right? Are you fed up with the right always getting the upper hand in media and political debates? Well, then this segment is for you. Zeteo is doing a new segment twice a month where we'll be talking to a very special guest. My good friend, Owen Jones.
Hey.
Guardian columnist, author, best-selling author, activist.
Looks a bit like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone.
Yeah, he's better looking. Former Labour Party member. Former Labour Party member, all-round activist, good guy. Owen and I just want to tell the audience, Owen and I have known each other, I think, for a very long time. We've our paths have crossed in different ways, but we've never actually worked together or done any kind of journalism together. Well, when did we first meet?
We first met, I was a little precocious. I was actually young rather than just masquerading as...
you always looked like you were 12 years old.
This is true.
That's why you've got the facial hair now, to look a little older.
This is to convince everyone actually I'm a geriatric millennial. Yeah, I remember it was like 2011. It was before my first book came out. Yeah. And I got, suddenly I got ranked.
Chavs was your first book.
That was it, exactly.
Made you very famous.
And I think they kind of heard that was on the cards. My publisher told people. And I remember it was this show. It was a really odd show where you kind of have this, you were the celebrity panelists.
The big questions.
That was it, big questions.
On the BBC with Nicky Campbell.
Yes, and you all waltzed in, the big celebrities, and we were the kind of the losers who were there in
the front row of the audience.
Exactly, who kind of asked
we looked down
exactly.
on you from up on the stage.
We were like the hoi polloi.
B-listers, I think.
B-listers. And I remember because I remember that was the first time I ever looked on Twitter to see.
But you were very good. I remember you were precocious, non-Macaulay Culkin. You was making some very good points.
But people were like, why is there a child on television talking about politics?
They've said that about you for many years. Also, you're that guy who's... What's your Twitter handle?
Oh, yeah, that was such a mistake. Owen Jones 84. At the time...
nobody puts their birth year in their handle unless they really want to point out that they're really young.
In my 20s, that was such an asset. And now it's the worst thing I've ever done in my entire life.
So I don't have Mehdi Hasan 79. It just doesn't have the ring to it.
The thing is, at the time, though, I hated it so much whenever I went on television because I wanted to be a serious commentator. I was there taking on the fight.
Why'd you put your birthday in your Twitter handle?
Because I'm not exactly a long-term strategist. But I went on, Question Time, which is the big... political discussion show.
Bit name dropping.
No, but what I mean is...
I've been on Question Time also.
You've been on many times. You smash it every time, obviously. The absolute master at the show. But everyone said at the time, you're going to love this in the future. Because at the time, I hated it. People were like, why isn't he doing his paper round?
Yes.
Why
is it past your bedtime?
Yeah, and they said when you're approaching 40...
Which you are now,
I know, all right.
1984 means... this year.
It's so...
happy
brutal.
birthday, Owen.
But they said I'd love it.
Welcome to my decade.
Yeah, to be fair, I think if having the right politics is a good skin routine.
Well, interestingly, you and I, you're almost in your 40s, I'm in my 40s. Do you remember that? You're almost in your 40s. Do you remember that line that I'm sure it's had thrown at you, which is, everyone gets more right-wing with age?
I think I've gone the opposite way.
You've got more left-wing
I think for a while...
I feel like that sometimes too, although many people would probably say, no, he's a sellout. But I feel that way sometimes as well.
But don't you feel it's because, actually, we're moderates in a world of extremism? I think that's what being on the left is, And
the world of extremism being right-wing extremism.
Yeah, well, the world, exactly, is governed by extremists and we're moderates. Because actually, if you think about our politics, it's, I don't know, things like the wealth created shouldn't just be concentrated in a few people's hands. Maybe you shouldn't run services that are for the benefit of people as cash
maybe
cows.
People should be able to afford a higher education.
For example, maybe you shouldn't slaughter, you shouldn't slaughter innocent people all the time. I mean, we're the extremists, apparently, and they're the moderates.
But it's always, I always have this debate in the US when people talk about Bernie Sanders and they're like, Donald Trump is on the far right and Bernie Sanders is on the far left. I'm like, the far left in America wants free healthcare. The far right wants Nazis in power. There's a little bit of a difference. Let's not both sides this nonsense. Yeah. No, that annoys me a lot. But look, now I'm in the US, it does give me some perspective on left and right, because obviously the political debate.
Well, you went to the US because you betrayed me, actually, Mehdi.
How did I betray you?
Because you left the United States. I thought we went, once we went on TV.
We did a show.
We did a show,
what did we do later?
I can't remember.
Channel 4.
Yeah, Channel 4. And it was about the time in Britain there was a big moral panic about people on benefits.
Oh,
people on social security. Exactly. And I thought we were I think we had
tag teamed up.
We tag teamed.
Didn't somebody walk out of that? Who was that right-wing journalist who walked out of that?
Alison Pearson at the Telegraph.
She walked out in an ad break.
Yeah, because what I did is I produced a column she'd written, which was
receipts,
nonsense.
Which I'm always.
And I went through what was nonsense, and then she stormed off in fury.
Snowflake.
I mean, she needed a safe space, but someone mocked us up as Batman and Robin But obviously, you were Batman. I was always the
I was
genius.
going to ask who's Batman.
I
who's
was
Robin?
obviously Robin.
Yeah,
I was the
1984. So I did leave.
genius. It was at the crucial moment before the world collapsed, though.
Hold on, I left, the 2015, before the British 20 election, before Brexit, before Trump. That is true. But what's interesting is I'm back in London now. We're recording this in the UK.
I mean, you've made up for it.
Isn't it interesting that when I left, Ed Miliband was the Labour leader, David Cameron was the Conservative Prime Minister. I come back and they're both still on the front bench, but not leaders. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it?
Is that seen as weird here in the UK? Feels weird to me from outside.
I think the problem is that politics has been so tumultuous and crazy for so long that you kind of, what seems wacky now just seems kind of normal. So that David Cameron, his return before seemed completely out of the question because he was Tory leader. He brought the Tories to power in 2010 with the Liberal Democrats here, who were like the centrist party. And they did austerity, wrecked the social fabric of this country. And I think a lot of the political turmoil in Britain, you can't understand it without looking at what they did to people, to social security, to public services, all the rest of it, living standards. And then he had this genius idea of calling a referendum on membership of the European Union. And he did that because he was getting pressure from the hard right of politics. Nigel Farage, people will know.
He set up everything that we have today.
He did, exactly. But then he did this referendum, which he was so cocky about, because he went to Eton, which is the poshest school on earth. And the whole point, if you go to Eton, they tell you basically, everything will always be exactly what you want. You'll always get your own way. So he called a referendum and then lost it. And then he had to resign. And nobody liked him after that because Remainers saw him, people who wanted to stay, saw him as someone who destroyed the EU membership because he wanted a political ruse. And Leavers were like, well, he tried to stop us leaving the European Union. But then the Conservative government now is basically disintegrating.
Everything is relative though, right? I mean, if Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak are your points in comparison, David Cameron looks like a statesman.
I could not disagree more. I think. Well, the reason I think.
I think he gets an easy ride because Boris is such a cartoon villain. But if you ask me who's the worst prime minister of our lifetimes, I would say David Cameron for exactly the reasons you laid out.
That's what I mean.
Because of lifetimes. Let's not go back to Thatcher, but of the modern era, because of austerity, because of all the groundwork he laid for it.
Yeah, but this is the thing, isn't it? And I think this is true with American politics. We'll see what you think about this because often, especially a certain type of commentator, politics is about vibes, not substance. So David Cameron had this kind of charismatic statesman-like demeanor about him. But he destroyed the social fabric of this country and laid the groundwork for everything that we've seen,
So how are you disagreeing with me?
No, I was agreeing with you. I thought you were saying Boris Johnson was the one who was seen as
Owen, I'm saying David Cameron's the worst and he gets away with it because Boris is his cartoon.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's what, sorry.
So we agree.
We're on the same page.
Back to agreeing again. What is happening right now?
But it's the same with George W. Bush, isn't it? George W. Bush, obviously horrendous president.
Should be at the Hague.
But then because he didn't do vulgar tweets.
Yes.
And then,
but now he paints paintings.
Exactly. Or he handed that sweet to
Michelle Obama.
To Michelle Obama, and everyone's like, that's so cute. Yeah. He's a war criminal.
He should be in the Hague.
But people are always rehabilitated.
Trump will be rehabilitated in years to come.
I bet you will as well.
So I'm back from the US. I'm in the UK. I try and follow British politics as much as I can, even though US politics keeps me busy. What is going on here? Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak, two deeply uncharismatic individuals running their parties. Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister. Sir Keir Starmer is going to be Prime Minister
Knight of the Realm.
Later this year, probably. Is he just, correct me if I'm wrong, is he just Tony Blair without the charisma?
That I've literally used that expression
good.
over and over
Great
again.
Minds think
Definitely on the same.
Is he Tony Blair without any of the good bits of Tony Blair? Because Tony Blair had some good bits.
Well, you were a bit of a fan to begin with, weren't you?
I was.
Shame you.
1997, I missed out on voting for him by a couple of months. I didn't turn 18 in time. Okay. I went to a private school. I went with a bunch of Tory boys.
Yeah, I know you were like,
So
to be a Blairite was a radical
to be a Blairite
lefty.
was a radical lefty.
Yeah.
So I missed out, and I gave him a chance. And even 2001, when he beat William Hague, it was kind of like it's William Hague. And then Iraq, war on terror, obviously changes everything and everything that comes after it. But, there were some things that he came in and record investment in the NHS and minimum wage and all the things that he inherited from John Smith in many ways, devolution. There were some good things, radical things that he did do. I know he had a crappy little card that he used to pull out. Does Keir Starmer have any of that?
No, he doesn't. You see, that is a really good point, I think, which is, look, I'm no Tony Blair fan. I think, to be honest, is a good...
I don't think anyone would mistake either of us for being Tony Blair fan.
Yeah, I think if you think someone should be trialled for in The Hague, then you're probably not a fan.
We've so far in the show put two people in The Hague.
Well, there's going to be a very long list by the end. But you had public investment, for
Yes.
example, which
Record.
exactly. I mean, they did bad things like increase the role of the
And
private
PFI,
sector,
yeah.
exactly, privatization. But that was a good thing, and it actually did make a big difference. Like the
Yes.
National Health Service brought to its knees under the Conservatives. They helped rebuild it. And the problem with Keir Starmer is, firstly, he became Labour leader by just being just so grotesquely dishonest, it's difficult to know where to begin. It's basically, imagine like the most right-wing Democrat possible, but they get elected pretending to be Bernie Sanders. And that's what he did. He said, Jeremy Corbyn, who he served under, basically had the right domestic policies. I will keep them, I promise. We'll have taxing the rich. We'll have public ownership. We'll get rid of student debt for people to go to university. And then as soon as he became leader, he just scrapped all of that. And the reason he's worse than Tony Blair is that was a different time. You had economic growth at the time, rising living standards. It was all based on a financial bubble, which went, pop very spectacularly. But this time, they're not promising public investment. They don't even have anti-poverty measures like the minimum wage, which was brought in by New Labour. They actually support Tory policies which drive children into poverty, so limiting benefits you get if you have more than two children.
And you can't even say they're doing it in order to be electable because they're going to win a landslide.
That's what's...
And this was the problem with Tony Blair, which is he didn't need to go. The argument always was John Smith would have won. People don't like to hear that, but he would have won. He wouldn't have got a 179 seat majority. Maybe that's not a bad thing, but he would have defeated John Major in 1997. Similarly, Starmer's going to win, right? So why so much caution? Is it, to quote Tony Blair, it's worse than you think? I actually believe this.
Well, actually, it's even worse than that. I think Tony Blair had actually a very clear political and ideological core, didn't he? And he was actually, often presented as kind of like a vicar figure who was very like religiously devout to his ideology. I think Keir Starmer just wants to be prime minister for the sake of it, but he surrounded himself by people.
So it's worse than Blair that he believes nothing.
Exactly, but he bears the imprint of the people around him, and the people around him.
Well, Blair is one of the people advising him. I read somewhere.
And Peter Mandelson, one of the creators of New Labour, the Prince of Darkness, I think he quite literally likes himself to be called, which gives you a flavour. So I think the problem is he's surrounded by himself by people whose, I think what really makes their heart beat a bit faster isn't taking on the Tories, taking on injustice. I think it's basically vengeance on the left. They hate the left of British politics. A lot of them are student politicians. In student politics, they were there fighting what they call the Trots, which is what they call anyone to the left of Genghis Khan. And I think a lot of it is just that, these are the sorts of people who, if they knew then what they knew now, they'd still support invading Iraq. That's the sort of politics they have. They don't think taxing the rich is a good thing. They don't support publicly owning utilities. They think all of that stuff is nonsense. And I think they want a big majority, the biggest possible majority. And the Tories have destroyed themselves because they had basically this scandal during the pandemic where they were partying whilst people couldn't hold the hands of their dying relatives because of lockdown.
And the Americans, at least, who are watching this, even people around the world, know about Liz Truss and the lettuce. Everyone followed that.
I missed that lettuce.
And that was a moment in the polls where it was done.
Well, that's what destroyed the Tories for good, because what Liz Truss tried to do is policies people don't like cutting tax on the rich. People don't like that anyway. She did those policies, crashed the economy in doing so, sent people's mortgages going up, and that's a big part of the Tory coalition, as well as rents. And people were like, after that, they were like, it doesn't matter what you say or do from now on, we're going to get rid of you.
And therefore, Labour are on a kind of course for victory. And at that moment, you quit the Labour Party.
I know, yeah.
At the moment Labour is about to win, you quit the Labour Party. In a nutshell, why?
Well, it was a toxic relationship. I think both of us needed to get out of it, frankly. I mean, look, I joined the Labour Party when I was 15. Actually, it's a big family tradition of mine. Yes. My great-grandfather was a Labour councillor. My grandmother was a Labour councillor. My parents met in the Labour Party. They met in a open-air Labour meeting outside of Tooting Bec in South London in 1968. Very romantic. And my mum bought me a Labour Party membership on my 15th birthday, which is the youngest age you can join the Labour Party. It was emotional,
I mean, people want like Nintendo, and you got Labour Party.
I'm a
membership.
loser. I didn't pretend I wasn't. So the reason I quit the Labour Party isn't just its policies, which are terrible. So they're going to keep austerity. They're going to keep cuts. They've got a fiscal rule they inherited from the Conservatives, which means in practice you can't have public investment. And I think, without public investment, this country is just doomed to decline and stagnation, and also political turmoil and division. They support measures that drive kids into poverty. what is the Labour Party for if it doesn't have policies to drag kids out of hardship and squalor? And its policy on Gaza is a moral disgrace. And just to give a flavour of that from my perspective, at the very beginning of this horror, Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer by trade, which he spoke about a lot when he was running to be leader and then didn't speak about at all afterwards. But he knows international law. And he was asked in a radio interview if Israel had the right to cut off energy and water to a civilian population. And he said, yes, I think Israel does have that right. Now, I'm not a human rights lawyer, Mehdi, but I do know Article 33 of the Geneva Convention prohibits collective punishment.
He's since had to row that back like everything else he said. I didn't mean to say that.
This is what this guy's like. I find he's absolutely this is astonishing. Because
it's on tape.
But you know what? If Donald Trump or Boris Johnson did something like this, people would go, look, this guy's an absolute shyster. Yeah. What he did is, for the next 2 weeks, he had his shadow ministers going on television to defend that position.
And he threw them under the bus.
Yeah, and then 2 weeks later, he said, I've never believed that Israel has the right to cut off water. It's like, you don't believe your own lying ears. But it's not just their terrible domestic and foreign policies. They've also shut down democracy. So they're purging all their opponents. In a way, it's like Tony Blair didn't do that. They're just purging people in the most spurious reasons. And they've made it clear, basically, that they're going to put the left in a sealed tomb for which there is no escape. So my view is that you need external pressure without them getting, basically, feeling they have to fight for people's votes. So I'm supporting this initiative, which is raising money for green or independent candidates on the basis that I think they'll come to power, people get really disillusioned with them, and if there aren't people on the left saying, look, we actually need to put pressure on them to do things like investment or public ownership and not supporting war crimes, then I think the far right will fill that vacuum. And there's going to be a Labour landslide. There's no risk whatsoever of the Tories coming into power. The only reason Labour say otherwise is because they want the biggest majority possible, because they want total power, which you can't trust them with. So you can vote how you want, knowing full well there is absolutely no chance of the Tories winning. I suppose that is slightly different, though, isn't it, Mehdi, from the United States, where a lot of people are not too keen on
There's no landslide victories in the United States. People aren't keen on genocide in the US either. As you know, the uncommitted movement has been pretty big in the US. I was just looking before I sat down. Over 500,000 people have voted uncommitted or uninstructed or whatever option they get to basically say, plague on both your houses.
And in a knife edge, that could be...
Well, this is in Democratic primaries, right? Yeah. This is where people are super loyal.
Yeah.
500,000 Democratic voters chose not to vote for the sitting president of the United States in a primary campaign where he's really running without any real rivals. In places like Michigan, it's over 100,000 votes in a very knife edge state. In Wisconsin, I think it was over 50,000, and Biden beat Trump by 20,000 votes in Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. So these are margins which could make huge differences. So in the US, when we're talking about this stuff, it's very different. When the Democrats say, hey, if you vote uncommitted or if you stay at home or if you vote third party, you'll help Trump. Sadly, they've got a point.
But on that, because Hillary Clinton the other week, I saw this clip, which I just thought really summed up.
Oh, I saw you tweeting about it, her telling people.
I mean, her and that kind of...
get over it. That's the choice
that was it. Get over it. And it was a case of this was, her 2016 strategy, basically, like it or lump it. And it's just...
I mean, both things are true. The substance of what she said is true, but that's not the way you say it.
But that's the thing. I worry what they'll do is a lot of people who are very angry because they don't like genocide. They don't like watching the mass slaughter of innocent people, their starvation. The US has been,
And this is the base of the Democratic Party.
Exactly.
This is Joe Biden's electorate are saying, please listen to us.
But they're, instead of a lot of the kind of Biden wing, instead of saying to them, look, we hear what you're saying, we need to act on this, we've made mistakes, they're going to go, you idiots, what the hell is wrong with you?
Yes.
If you don't do this, then it's your fault.
That's what I've said to friends of mine who have said, we're not voting for Biden, especially Muslim friends of mine, because we want to punish him and we want them to lose and know they lost because of us. I don't think the Democrats are going to wake up on November whatever morning and say, oh man, we really screwed up. We need to make amends with the left and with young people and Muslims. I think they're going to blame them and hector them even more. Look, the problem in America is knife edge elections, right? There's just every election is super tight.
Because last time it needed a 2% swing and Trump would have won.
I mean, last time I think the numbers are 70,000 people voted differently. Trump stays in office because the vote margins are so tight in Georgia, in Michigan, and Wisconsin. And in Michigan and Georgia, that's where there are big Muslim crowds, big young crowds, black voters also. It's not just Muslims. A lot of black pastors in Georgia saying, we can't tell our congregations, we can't tell them Gaza's okay. It's not. We're not happy about this. So the US is very different to the UK right now, where you have got Starmer on course for a landslide majority. People can vote their consciences, as you're encouraging them to do. In the US, you vote your conscience, fine, but
in some states you can. Though,
oh yeah,
in New York,
if you're in New York or California, vote your conscience all day long.
Yeah.
Vote Cornell, vote whatever you want.
In Ohio, maybe not such a wise move.
Well, Ohio is much more of a Republican state these days.
yeah,
But the main
sure.
ones are Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, maybe Nevada. So, and there's big concentrations of Muslim Americans, Arab Americans, black voters, young progressives, all people who are begging the administration, please do something about the genocide in Gaza. And look, again, the difference is the Labour Party, at least rhetorically, correct me if I'm wrong, Owen, is shifting on this issue. I'm seeing David Lammy saying, publish the legal advice. We need to suspend arms sales.
I think giving a little bit too much credit here.
I mean,
well,
where I'm coming from America, where Joe Biden won't budge an inch.
no, but he's done hand-wringing, and that's what we're talking about here.
No,
Biden's done this whole
He's done
hand-wringing.
very little. He could do way more, even rhetorically.
Well, I think that the question is about leverage. And so the Scottish National Party, pro-independent Scottish Party, they tabled a motion calling for an immediate ceasefire and holding Israel account for collective punishment. And the point of that motion is therefore has consequences. If you think Israel is guilty of what is a war crime, then you have to end arms sales, for example. And now it's very clear that the government have been given legal advice telling them that Israel self-evidently has violated international humanitarian law, but they won't publish it. But that means all arms sales should end. Now, that is a basic minimum ask that Labour could do, but they haven't committed to it. And I think that's the point. You can do Benjamin Netanyahu knows Western politicians can vent and all the rest of it. It doesn't matter. What matters is a diplomatic, political.
Here's the other thing Benjamin Netanyahu knows. He knows that Israel can kill British and American citizens without any consequences from the British and American governments. Joe Biden very grandly did airstrikes on 85 Iranian-related facilities in Syria in retaliation for 3 American soldiers losing their lives in Jordan. And he said, if you harm an American, we will respond. Apparently not. If you're an American in the West Bank, like 2 teenagers who got shot and killed, no response. Shireen Abu Akleh, American journalist for Al Jazeera, no response. And now American citizen for World Central Kitchen. And you've got Suella Braverman, Owen, I just saw in Israel, this great nationalist, British patriot, saying, it was an accident. They didn't mean it. We shouldn't make a big deal out of it. British citizens
I know
killed.
it's astonishing.
What happened to British nationalism when British citizens
Because
were killed?
on the one hand, it is, look, not to detract from the horror that these families are going through, obviously, but it is beyond enraging that 40,000 Palestinians or so have been killed, including those
But
buried
it takes a
under the
bunch
rubble.
of white and Americans
And then
to die for it.
all of a sudden,
Agreed.
that's a scandal. I mean, it couldn't, all the way through the racism of this, hasn't
Yes.
it? It's just been so lack of subtlety about Palestinian life being worth nothing. And this really has illustrated that. At the same time, you've just had a state literally slaughter 7 humanitarian workers in a way which was actually calculated, given...
Braverman said it wasn't deliberate or intended. They literally, 3 attacks over 2
one,
kilometers?
Exactly, when with World Central Kitchen logos on them. One of the first cars attacked, they run, they get to the second car, that's then attacked. And then, it was a slaughter of 7 aid workers, 200 aid workers or so, mostly Palestinians.
But our
also
patriotic leaders...
But that's the thing. Suella Braverman, I love Britain. We're going to take on Britain's enemies. We'll keep Britain safe. Our opponents are the ones who
Same
our
in the
citizens
US.
in harm's way. But then she says, well, Israel has said it's a mistake. Let's all move on.
Same in America. You've got Republicans and Democrats flag waving all the time. I said Biden said we'll respond. Don't get me started on Tom Cotton and Josh Hawley and Lindsey Graham and all these fake patriots in the Republican Party. Not a word about this American killed. And this goes back years. It goes back to Rachel Corrie. Goes back to James Handel. Goes back to Tom Handel.
Yeah, James Miller.
James Miller.
British journalist.
Multiple British and American aid workers, journalists killed by Israelis. No consequence.
Well, it's interesting. It just shows how the media can frame something to be a scandal or not, doesn't it? Because
I mean, it's very simple. If Iran had killed 7 aid workers with three Brits and 1 American,
could you imagine?
We would be.
Could you imagine?
We'd be at war right
Like the absolute hysteria that would have
So
provoked.
on that note, because we're running out of time, I do want to one last thing because I'll explain what's happening next. But one last thing for this conversation today. You said, can you imagine the hysteria? The reaction of people since October the 7th. I know you and I have talked about this offline. A lot of people have really shown us who they are. And I feel like even worse than post 9/11, even more dramatically, I don't think we can go back to a pre-October 7th days. We've seen a lot of people, liberals, leftists, celebrities, we've seen their real colours when a genocide happens on camera and people either can't say anything about it or defend it.
This is the great moral test of our time. And I think what's so shocking isn't just now the people who still support this, who I have to say,
Dwindling munch.
well, I've got to the point, I just think they're so morally depraved. I can't even reason with.
If you're defending the killing of aid workers,
Do you see what I mean? It's just like I've never really felt so firmly I live in a different moral universe than my opponents. That I just don't. The way in which I see the world and morality is just divorced, and I don't think those people, have a moral compass. And I'm just going to be completely honest about that. I'm shocked as well by the silent though, and the people who know this is wrong, but who won't properly speak out.
Yes.
And look, we all know if you speak out on this issue, you get a lot of crap.
Yeah.
You get demonized, you get smeared.
Yeah.
People have been driven from their jobs. They've, been hounded. Have you noticed cancel culture, that whole moral panic, stopped on the 7th of October? No one talks about cancel
we're
culture anymore.
pro-cancel culture now.
That's the point.
We're firing
Exactly.
university presidents.
The people who are always going on about free speech
Yes,
and all the rest, they're
Don't
the
forget,
ones now.
Palestinians and pro-Palestinian voices have always been the greatest victims of cancel
Exactly. And we can see now people of colour, obviously disproportionately those who are targeted, Muslims, Palestinians as well. But for me, I think it just feels like the world turned upside down, where you're seeing, 14,000 plus children being slaughtered. Because we talk about, on 7th of October, when terrible war crimes were kicked out by Hamas, 36 Israeli kids were killed that day, which I think all of us would regard as intolerable. And yet the fact we've got to 14,000 plus children being buried alive, burned to death, in the most hideous way possible, and that's been normalised. But the failure of lots of people to speak out and take a stand has shocked me in a way that I can't even, I've never been shocked in that way in my entire life.
But there's no going back.
No.
I mean, after the Iraq War, you'll remember, I went on for years writing about Iraq. It was the biggest moment of my life, politically, morally, in every way. It formed who I am in many ways. And people used to say to me, "Are you still banging on about Iraq? We've got to move on. Stop talking about Iraq." And I would say, no. 100,000 people are dead. The geopolitical consequences are huge. The domestic political, some would say Trump was president thanks to Iraq. And I feel Gaza is the same way. I'm not going to move on from Gaza. If people think we're going to move on from Gaza, we're not.
No, I mean, there was always that racism about the Iraq War and people like rolling their eyes, still going on about that, are you?
And they're going to do that for Gaza.
Of course.
And you and I can't let them.
But I think this is why this matters, because in the 21st century, everything you and I and people like us said about all these catastrophic military adventures we've been vindicated in the worst possible way, because all we've got to show for it is a lot of dead people. And these people walk from crime scene to crime scene, splattered with more blood as they do, calling for more blood, and they're still presented as men of moderation or women of moderation, respectability.
I think that is changing, though. I think that is, if you look at the way that Biden is chased by protesters, you look at the way his junior officials in his administration are interrupted by protesters, often Jewish protesters, I should point out, young Jewish activists. I think that is going to haunt them. And the way that Blair still gets stopped in public, when he's going out to it, I think this will follow them for decades. It has to.
I think this is actually a big tipping point in terms of how a lot of people frankly see the media. I think the media coverage has just been so gratuitously racist and not showing the reality of what Israel's war crimes actually are.
It's the perfect moment for someone to start an alternative media organisation.
I do like the way you've become I've always seen you as a kind of Rupert Murdoch of the left, actually, with your burgeoning media empire.
You're Macaulay Culkin, I'm Rupert Murdoch. That's a fair swap. So look, you said the words tipping point. Great moment to wrap this conversation up, because I think we are at a tipping point. I think we need to keep pushing.
Yeah, we need to keep pushing. It's very, very important.
Very much so. They want us to move on.
We can't let them get away.
They want us to move on. They want us to equivocate. We're not going to let them.
No.
This conversation is only just beginning. Owen is now a contributor for Zeteo. Owen and I are going to be having regular conversations at least twice a month, I hope.
Let's do it.
One of them is going to be like this, where we just talk at each other. The other one is going to be with all of you, with paid subscribers to Zeteo. We're going to have a town hall once a month where you can put your questions to me and Owen as we debate and discuss what's going on in the news, what's going on around the world. It's important we have these conversations. I can't think of anyone better to have these conversations with, especially on British politics, American politics, the intersection between the two. So keep watching. Owen, you're going to come back in a couple of weeks.
Oh, you wouldn't be able to keep me away, Mehdi. I'm very excited about this, by the way. I'm very, very excited. I think this is a really, really important venture. It was desperately needed. You're filling, I think, a vacuum. I think this shows that people want something different, and you're the guy to do it.
The best part of this is I get to set up a company and then say, who do I want to work with? And I get to work with Owen Jones.
Break my heart.
Thanks so much.
Bless you.